Hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of Aircover. Aircover is an international, inspiring and informative webinar series by Global University Systems that brings to you some of the most interesting businesses and business leaders from across the globe. Our topic today is launching a career at Google. And we are joined by Duncan Watts, Senior Industry Manager at one of the leading tech companies in the world, Google. Hello Duncan, a very warm welcome. Thank you for taking the time to speak to our staff and students. We are really excited to have you here.
I'm excited as well, Jackson. Thanks for having me along.
Thank you, Duncan. And just before we start, Duncan, we've already discussed this before. Gus places a lot of importance on its company values, and I would like to tease out one of those values and hear what your thoughts are on respect. What does respect mean to Google?
Well, actually, respect as one of Gus's values is actually a shared value that we have at Google. When our current chief executive, Sundar Pichai, took up the helm about 5 years ago to be chief executive of Google, he took a fresh look at our business and a fresh look at what we're trying to do to our users all around the world, of which we have obviously many millions. And we realized that one of the things we try to do as a business is to do the right thing for our users, the right thing to keep them safe online and to give them products and services that are super useful and they want to use many times a day. And so as part of that process, we defined a new set of values. And one of the ones that I think he holds most dear is that value of respect. I guess it's broken into three parts. So respect the user, that's everyone around us that uses Google day to day. Respect the opportunity to deliver great things to our business customers and also to our consumer users. And then perhaps most importantly, because it kind of all begins with this, is respect each other around the office in the day to day and make sure that everyone's opinion is valued and that we have a nice diverse workplace.
Thank you, Duncan. What a great way to start the webinar. To our viewers, do send questions for Duncan in the live chat box and we'll answer them during the Q&A session. So Duncan, let's dive straight in. Can you give us an insight into your career journey and how you got to where you are today?
Wow. Well, back when dinosaurs roamed the planet, I was at a University of London, studying a degree in business in economics, and it was around the time when the internet started to be used a bit more widely by student populations. I mean, that's where the internet came from. It was an academic network that allowed academics to share information around the place. So in our campus, just west of London, we enjoyed super fast connectivity, which was not freely available at that time. So we're in the late 90s now. And it was just an amazing platform for learning, for sharing, and for discovering new stuff. And so I fell in love with the internet during my studies. And I knew that in some way I wanted to pursue a career in tech. So things kind of progressed. I did plenty of fun stuff during my degree, even took a year out and went to the US for a year. But afterwards, I decided I'd start off with the plumbing of the internet, the connectivity. So I worked for a telecoms company called BT, which is the big telco in the UK. And I did an internship there, working on some fun tech stuff. Figured out that was something I really enjoyed doing. Went to study a bit more about it back and did a master's again in London University, and at the end of that I started a company with a bunch of people I've met at BT, and we had a lot of fun, and that company was not about telecoms, but it was more about the internet and developing software for browsers back when the browser was really only just beginning to get interesting and able to host an application. So my career has been based on those two things: fast broadband, browser-based technology, and a love for technology.
Everything that we love to hear. What advice would you give to students looking to break into the tech industry and get noticed by a company like Google upon graduation?
Sure. So this is a difficult one, right? But I have to say it's a lot easier now than it was perhaps when someone like me was looking for work, because we have an amazing variety of platforms to discover lots about potential career paths, to discover lots about businesses that you might want to work for, and to even reach out to professionals through platforms like LinkedIn that do already work for those companies. And as my mum would always say, if you don't ask, you don't get. And so my number one tip for any student kind of figuring out what to do is really just to start a conversation. Get a short list of companies you kind of attracted by, or you like the brands of, or you figured you like even using as a consumer, and reach out to folk that work for them. Ask them for a coffee chat, an online chat, just to find out a little bit more about the culture of the company. There are other websites as well, like Glassdoor, and plenty of other ones beside that help you to discover a bit more about the company's culture and what their current employees are paid, what their current employees are even saying about the companies they work for. So there's so much you can do just from your desktop to discover more about that stuff. And then in terms of making sure you look good for that magic moment where you start to decide to enter an interview process, make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to scratch, make sure you've got all of your experience on there, and most importantly your interests, because as a new employee and someone without a lot of professional experience, it's more about you than what you know. So demonstrate that you're interesting, demonstrate you have a diverse set of interests, demonstrate that you like trying new stuff, that you have done some cool stuff already, that you might be doing some volunteering, or whatever that makes you you. You know, explain it. And I think that's the point at which you can differentiate yourself from everyone else that's going to be going for that top position. And then finally, I would say that your CV, which is ultimately that document that you have to append to any application, is really good. Less is more, and make sure that it's tailored for the job that you're applying for, rather than just to blanket fire it into every opportunity or every position you want to apply for. And most importantly, get feedback on it. Send it to your friends, send it to your relatives, and ask them for tough feedback on how they think the CV looks. And then you should be all set. But most importantly, and the first thing I mentioned, you must ask cheeky questions. If you don't ask, you don't get. The worst that can happen is you get a no.
Yeah. Good point. So now here's a burning question that most of our students would ask. What opportunities are available for students at Google, specifically in terms of placements, internships, scholarships, graduate schemes, or even work experience?
Yeah.
And how can students access these?
Yeah, sure. So many. We have presence in over 80 countries. I've lost count of how many offices that is. I've definitely not visited them all. And we're a company of well over 200,000 employees now. So there's always an opportunity somewhere going at Google, whether that be for permanent employment or temporary employment. The good news is that there's no secret sauce to this. Every single one of our jobs are advertised on our careers website, which you can go to at careers.google.com. And in addition to the jobs which you can search by role type, by geographic location, there's plenty on there you can do to discover what makes Google Google, what makes you potentially an attractive candidate for a job there. There'll be interviews on there, lots of YouTube videos of how to prepare for interviews, and then most importantly, a big fat application button. Another thing that is important to note is if you happen to have within your personal network a Googler, then it's always good to reach out to them for a referral, because a lot of our eventual employees are referred into Google in the first instance, and then it's really down to you at interview.
This is good to know. What skills and qualities should students look to develop to better their chance of employment in the tech industry?
Yeah, so I've written some notes on this because it's a really important thing to consider. It's so important to think about what you're doing in your studies to sharpen your skills, to make yourself attractive to the marketplace and to make your skills useful to the businesses that might want to employ you. But there's so much more to it than that. It's about demonstrating a passion and enthusiasm for what it is you want to go and do. So if that's software development, then clearly it's not something you're studying, but it's something you genuinely are interested in doing, you genuinely feel passionate about. And I think that interviewers tend to be very, very good at detecting when a candidate is deeply into their subject and therefore likely to be good at their job, versus a candidate that just happens to know something about it, perhaps is not interested or dedicated to it. So my number one tip would be to do something and study something, and ultimately want to do something post-studies that you feel a deep connection to and a deep passion for. It doesn't mean you do it outside, your work life, but at least when you're in work, you're doing something that feels meaningful to what you do, at best, and at worst, you're working for a company that does something meaningful in the world, even if the role you're doing is not perhaps as sexy as you might want it to be. Yeah.
So you're also a guest lecturer at the Royal Holloway University in London. So you have a lot of exposure to students. What are some of the common misconceptions that students have about the tech industry, or particularly Google?
Sure. So Royal Holloway is actually my alma mater. It's where I studied my undergrad and my postgrad. So I have a deep affection for the place, and I go back once a year to talk to students on the management course and lecture them, usually for their Easter assignment. And I bill it as an essential lecture to attend because I give hints and tips of how to get an ace in the assignment. So I love going back there and reconnecting with the place and reconnecting with what it was like to be a student. Occasionally I do have to shake the students to wake them up, but I put that more on me than them. Maybe a wild night at the union, the night before the lectures I do. So I think one of the common misconceptions is that tech is inhabited by super geeks, by people who literally just do nothing but code. I think anything could be further than the truth. Technology doesn't just mean developing software. Technology is about developing products that are useful, understanding the market and the users, and doing lots of insights and research to inform product development and then engineering. And then, of course, there are plenty of commercial jobs as well as the more technical development jobs in roles such as the one I occupy, which is stakeholder management, partnership management, sales. And so there's loads of stuff you can do that's not deep technology working for a technology company. At Google, people have asked me, is it all slides in the, I don't mean PowerPoint or Google Slides, I mean as in slides and free snacks. And there is a bit of that, but we actually have to get some stuff done day to day as well. So there's some of the common misconceptions cleared up for you, mate.
But it's such a fast-moving industry, isn't it? Fast-paced, and it's hard to keep on top of the latest trends and skills.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to students who are looking to keep their technology skills up to date, in line with leading companies like Google?
Well, there's a famous technology doctrine called Moore's Law. It was invented by one of the founders of Intel. His name was Gordon Moore, hence Moore's Law. Yeah. And he noticed that the speed of processing, so computer processing, was roughly doubling every 18 months. And that law has held true since the 1970s. And so, the compute power that you've got in your smartphone is now well above even the biggest and most expensive computers 20 years ago. So you have a supercomputer in your pocket. All of this means that technology is changing at an ever-increasing pace. And so in order to keep pace with that, you cannot just rely on your university or academic institution to be teaching you the latest skills. That's an important grounding and will be absolutely indispensable. But in a technology career, you need to get really passionate about it, research it, read blogs, watch YouTube, engage in the subject. You need to do that in order to remain current. Get on newsletters, read Wired magazine that talks about the latest applications of the latest technology and predicts where things are likely to go. This is so important. Industries that weren't even thought about 10 years ago are now dominating the world. And companies that you haven't even heard of 5 years ago are some of the biggest in the world now. So the speed of pace and innovation is enormous. And that means that maybe a company that you guys end up working for at the end of your degree or the end of your course may not have even been invented yet. And that's such an exciting prospect, but it does mean that you need to keep your finger on the pulse.
Absolutely. You've mentioned that you did a gap year during your studies.
I did.
So what are some of the things you did during your to further your career along your line, similarly to what students can do today, like voluntary work or build up their portfolio before seeking full-time employment at Google? So what would make them, so to say, sexy, to use the terminology?
Got it. Well, exactly. I mean, it does go back to what I mentioned earlier. The more you can demonstrate that you do stuff like to enrich your life, that you follow your passions, that you like to help people or organizations either in return for money or just to feel good about things. It just, all of that stuff makes you a more employable person. It means that on day one, you're going to land up in that job and you're going to be someone that the business wants to have around, someone that people want to work with and be in their team. So the more you can do to demonstrate that authentically, the better. I mean, it will make your life richer in the process. That's the whole point, right? But do think about it. It's not just about the qualification. It's not just about the technical requirements. I mean, at Google, we used to require everyone that worked for the company to have a degree or even a master's, PhD. This is no longer the case. Technology companies now recognize that the best candidates come from all walks of life and have normally a diverse and varied set of experiences. And so that year out I did during my degree was precisely to take a step back. Yeah. It was all going very fast, like 2 years of my degree went like that. It's like, come on guys, take a step back, go and do something completely different. Yeah. And I studied other stuff. I studied yoga, I studied music, I studied a bit of marketing to keep the department at home happy, but generally had a great time just broadening my horizons. Doesn't mean you need to go to the US, but it does mean you need to seek some stuff that you feel a connection to and you can kind of put on your CV as something that makes you you.
Makes you invaluable, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
Extra experience.
Employable.
We spoke a little bit about CVs right at the beginning
Yeah.
when we started. So when applying for roles at Google, what should students look for in the application interview process to make sure that it's the right fit for them and to also make sure they're fit for the job? So it's the right fit, vice versa.
Yeah, sure. So I think this is very similar to the points I made earlier. In response to this, I'm not going to make so different, but I will re-emphasize that doing your research is the most important thing. It's true that many people are employable in businesses like Google. You know, there are maybe every single person we take to interview could do the role, but only a few of them would be a good fit for the company. And that's because technology companies like Google, and in fact many companies that really have a true belief in what they stand for and the values they represent, they attract a particular type of individual, a particular personality type. It's not just about skill set. And so the worst case is you end up working for a company that you could do the job of, but you don't resonate with. Yeah. It's really important to do your research, read Glassdoor, read LinkedIn, reach out to people that already work for that company. So what is it like to work for company X? Yeah. Do your research. And that means you don't end up somewhere you feel like you've made a huge wrong turn doing. Yeah. And I have to say there is no excuse now. Back in the 70s, 80s, and even way before that, it wasn't often very easy to find out about what it would be like working for these companies. Yeah. But it is now. And there's so much information freely available. It's down to you to search it out and seek out those connections that are going to help you, educate you to make the right decision as to which companies you want to work for.
And can you give an insight into the types of skills you developed in your previous job roles and the various transferable skills students may currently have that can be useful when working for
Yes, yeah. And this was a really interesting one to answer. It's not something I'd really considered before. And my answer is I think there are probably 4 core skills which, irrespective of your role, whether you're doing a personal admin role for one of the chief executives of a company, whether you're in marketing, whether you're doing product development, or perhaps in a deep engineering role and writing software for a technology business, it doesn't matter. Everyone should think carefully about how they can hone these 4 key skills that are much on the softer end. First thing is selling. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a salesperson or if you're developing software. Ultimately, when you're in a business dealing with stakeholders internally, as well as partners externally, you're constantly selling ideas. You're constantly influencing opinions. And so your ability to do that, and do that in the right way without bludgeoning people, is a really important skill to have. It's also a really important skill to have day to day. I sell stuff to my kids all day long in a constant negotiation. And now that second thing of the 4 is negotiation. To be able to find the happy territory behind what someone you're speaking to wants and what you want to do. So long as there's not a compromise, we call that, so long as there not a compromise in one direction too far, we call that the happy medium. And so negotiating that is actually a real skill set. And there are lots of courses that you can do when you're in a place of work that help you hone that stuff. So have a think about that as the second. Then third, any opportunity you have to manage people is really important, even if your role doesn't necessarily require it. The ability to manage people, manage stakeholders, in either direct reports of your own or in a team is really important. To be able to display elements of leadership. And I'm not talking about leadership in the kind of command and control. I'm talking about a softer style of leadership where you know when it is your turn to take the lead and when you know it's perhaps your turn to take a step back because there's someone more appropriate to move things on. And then finally, any customer-facing role you can ever have is a useful one. It's not long before I will encourage my eldest boy to take up a role working in a cafe, to take up a role front of house somewhere, to be able to deal with people day to day, to be able to keep the humour even when your customers are being difficult is such an important skill set to have. And it goes back to no matter what you're doing for an enterprise, for a company that you're working for, you're always in a situation where you're having to deal with stakeholders internally who are relying on you to do your stuff. Yeah. And they are customers. and you need to be able to deal with them no matter what walk of life you're in and what career you choose. So they're the 4 things.
4 brilliant things to take note of. I hope you have penciled it down. And the final question, Duncan, we have is, why should students be excited at the prospect of a career in the tech industry? What separates the tech industry and companies like Google from others that make it so desirable to work in today?
I think everyone that works in tech, and specifically at Google, is excited about technology, excited about the role technology has to transform and make better the lives of people around them and all of the users on our platforms. That's people's real kind of point of resonance working at Google, is that fast-paced and passionate role we have in making a difference in people's lives. And then I think there is also an element of flexibility in a lot of technology workplaces. There's hot competition for the top talent, and the pandemic has sped up the advent of more flexible working, becoming part of the day-to-day life of working in tech businesses like Google. I have a hybrid work environment. I work a couple of days from home and a couple of days in the office or with customers. I can choose to do what I want. It's ultimately down to whether I'm doing a good job and whether the teams that I'm working with are valuing my work as well. And then finally, you know what, the money's not too bad, right? It's a supply and demand thing. Yeah. It's a free market economy. If you've got a bunch of skills that are hotly prized by big companies and tech companies like Google, then they're willing to pay for that. But they also will demand their pound of flesh. So don't think you can rock up and just be able to coast along. You need to step up. It's a constant place of constant change, fairly competitive. And ultimately, if you're not loving it and you don't feel a deep connection with the technology underlying our platforms, then it's kind of not going to equate to much. Yeah. And that's fine. But it's good to know that before you land up there.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Duncan, let's take a look at some of the questions we received from our viewers.
Sounds good.
So one of the first questions is, if you were a student today, would you pursue a career in the tech industry? And if so, what are the main reasons and why?
Yeah, if I was a student today, I absolutely would. And it boils down to what I really just ended the last question saying, which is a personal affection towards technology. I feel technology has a great role to play in the world. And we've seen the effect of that and the redistribution of knowledge that has taken place, particularly with the advent of the smartphone, the democratization of information and the power it's put into individuals' hands, irrespective of their backgrounds and education or locations. That for me is something I resonate very strongly with. So yes, I would go back into technology, or go into technology if I was a student today, absolutely.
The second question is it possible for a person with no work experience and no background in engineering to work at Google?
Absolutely. It is very unlikely you'll be able to get a technical role because a technical role by definition requires you to have some technical skills which are normally acquired at university or normally acquired in some form of other pursuit you might be passionate about to even self-educate on that stuff. So there'll be a form of, like, think of it as a bar you have to hit in order to get into the business. Yeah. But there are many, many roles at Google all of the time in many different places. And so there'll be always something for someone without a technical qualification. But I would encourage you to look carefully at the job description, which normally includes some role requirements in terms of either academic qualifications or skill sets. And it's highly unlikely you'd be able to get an interview unless you had at least some of those going for you.
The next one is more of a general question. What is the best way to contact Duncan? Can we connect with him on LinkedIn?
I'd be very happy.
Yes. So, good, there you have your answer. Third question is, we all know that job opportunities at Google generate a lot of competition. What is the average rate of applicants for a position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I knew the answer. I've seen some pretty wild statistics, and they're obviously very variable depending on the role type, the seniority, and obviously then the location. I can safely say, though, that most job opportunities at Google are very hotly contested, not just internally, because they're advertised internally to current employees, as well as externally. So instead of focusing on that, because it's kind of like scary factor, focus on what you can control, which is what your skill sets are, the stuff you do outside your work and your studies, and then ultimately what you do to make connections to the companies you decide you want to apply for.
Well, the next one is a question. It'll be interesting because I wouldn't know the answer to this. I'm sure you get this question a lot, but how accurate is the 2013 comedy about Google with Vince Van Gunn and Owen Wilson, The Internship?
The Internship.
Have you ever seen it?
I actually watched it.
You watched it?
I watched it. I watched it as preparation for my interview back in 2014. And I was told to take it with an enormous pinch of salt. Okay. But actually, the fun fact is that a couple of the founders do make a cameo in one of the scenes.
Oh, did you?
And a bit of it was actually filmed on the Google campus in Mountain View, California. I don't think it was completely endorsed by Google, but perhaps enough for a couple of them to make cameos. So yeah.
This is good to know.
Yeah.
Our next question is, how competitive are job roles at Google, and what can I do to stand out? I think you've already mentioned a couple of.
Yeah, exactly. And to reiterate, because it's another great question, is focus on the stuff you can control. You can't control how competitive the roles are. Yeah. They are very competitive, but I'm here, and I got through somehow. And I'll tell you how I got through. I got through because I showed that I was deeply passionate in the field that I wanted to go into, which was technology and actually advertising. The second thing is I did okay in my studies, so I got a good set of grades. The third thing is I made some connections, and I used my network in order to, first of all, get the interview, and then it was down to me. So, yeah, you just got to get out there, and remember, if you don't ask, you don't get.
And as technology continues to progress, how possible is it that there will be jobs that do not exist today available to graduates in the next few years?
Yeah. That question almost is like a plant. I mean, that's like the perfect question, right? As I said, Moore's law and that definition that computing power is roughly doubling every 18 months, which means computers are becoming more powerful, which means you can do more cool stuff with them. I mean, you think about the processing power required to do virtual reality, which I did actually with the team as a kind of team build just yesterday. We had 5 virtual reality headsets running through a server. The computing power required to create that sort of virtual environment and then allow us to interact real time to kill zombies, which is I think what the game was, is just enormous, right? And because of this, new companies are spawning all the time that take advantage of this incredible processing power, and also the different ways in which consumers are finding ways to use their devices. So I can think of a bunch of companies I won't name that weren't even a scratch on the horizon when I first joined Google only 8 years ago. So I guarantee you that there's a bunch of companies that are just being cooked up at the moment, which will be the size of Google and possibly even bigger within 10 years.
Out of interest, who do Google view as their biggest competitors, and how important is acquiring young talent to stay ahead of the game?
Yeah, so one of the things that Google holds really dear to itself and the values that we represent is we always will do the right thing for the user, right? So we focus intensely on what the user is wanting to do. And we do thousands of experiments of new bits of technology to enhance our search experience and to enhance apps like Google Maps, Google Drive, and all of the business-to-business applications that we have in the suite. And the reason for that is we know that if we were to stand still, then someone else somewhere would have a better answer to the question than Google does. Yes. And that's the point at which we begin to fail, which thankfully hasn't begun to happen yet. And so we think about the user carefully, and we do lots of research about what sort of technology users want to use and how that's changing. And then we hopefully provide answers to that in new features developments and new products along the way. So we don't think too much about the competition, but it is there. And it's there and ever present all around the world in all of the different businesses that we have.
Will Google recognize skills learned on some online platforms like Coursera, I think. So it's an online platform.
Sure. I can't speak specifically about that because I've not heard of that one or the qualifications you can get using it. But I think it boils down to being able to demonstrate that you've taken initiative in learning new skills, in staying current with the current skills required by the marketplace, and then obviously being able to demonstrate you can actually do that stuff, if it's coding, for example, when put to the test. So whatever you're doing to bring yourself along and to develop your skill set is a good thing. It's not a question of whether Google formally recognizes or doesn't recognize something. As I said before, a degree is not even mandatory anymore if you want to work in a position at Google. We just look for what people have done, what they claim to be able to do to get to interview stage, and then obviously test that out.
Our next question is, as an accounting student, what type of technology can I learn to gain opportunities in the industry?
What kind of
technology can I learn to gain opportunities in the tech industry?
Yeah. Okay. So accounting is actually a module I did at my degree. It was one of the ones I did less well in. Let's say I don't think I'm a natural accountant, although apparently my grandma was. So it skipped many generations. I remember the principles of accounting very well. The actual practical application of it, I would imagine these days, is very, very software based. And so the answer to the question would be to do the research on what is going to be most useful to equip yourself for a career in accounting or accountancy, if that's what you choose to do. To find out what other people studied, to find out what qualifications people have on LinkedIn with role types you're going for, and to use the wonderful World Wide Web to do the research and ultimately come to a conclusion as to what would be good to learn pre going for an interview. It's always good to have someone rock up at an interview and say, hey, actually I do that already, or I have learned that on my previous employer, or I studied a module in my degree that actually equipped me to do that. I'd be running from day one. So if you do the research, then execute on it, then you should land in a better place than you otherwise would.
The next question is, what are the opportunities at Google with respect to blockchain technology?
Blockchain. Yeah, blockchain is something that we think deeply about, and it's something that is beginning to be integrated into some of our products. There's more about what we think about blockchain you can read online. I think there's some blogs that on google.com that you can read, statements from our chief executive about the importance of blockchain technologies and how Google is beginning to think about it. I think no question that it's going to be a fundamental part of what all technology companies do into the future. It's here to stay. Much more about it, I can't really say.
And the next one is, can a marketing graduate get a job role at Google?
Absolutely. Yeah, anyone can get a job role at Google, providing they have the relevant skills and experience or life interests that make them attractive to us as a candidate. Yeah.
How do you keep the audience interested throughout the years? There are some funny questions on there.
The audience.
Yes.
I think what this brilliant person is asking is how do we keep our users using Google? And the simple answer is an obsessive interest in what people want, what people find useful, and ultimately to give them what they want as quickly and as cleanly as possible. So you think about how the search experience, which is obviously still our core day-to-day product, has evolved over the years from something a little bit clunky perhaps in the late 90s, early noughties when we were first founded, to what it is today, which is a highly personalized, very context-sensitive search interface. There's more to come. And actually, if people really want to geek out on this stuff, there was an event recently called Search On, which you'll find on Google's YouTube channel, where a couple of our senior execs talk about the evolution of our search product and what users can expect around the world over the next 12 to 18 months in terms of innovation. It's pretty exciting.
And the final question is, what are the pros and cons of students seeking employment at leading tech firms like Google straight from university, rather than gaining skills at a smaller company such as a startup?
The pros and cons?
Pros and cons,
yeah. Everything is so personal. It's completely circumstantial. So there's no one answer to this. What it boils down to is knowing what motivates you. And you can only really know that by trying stuff out. And in order to make that first move, which often is such a fundamental one, you know, who are you going to work for after you've finished your studies? Such an important move. The best thing you can possibly do is do your research, really geek out on it, and figure out what feels right. And because you have no experience of the workplace or little of a permanent workplace, which is often the case for graduates, sometimes it's just a matter of getting in there and finding out and listening to your gut. You know, you go to the interview. Did it feel like someone you wanted to be working for? Did it feel like a workplace that you connected with, whose values that really represent you. A kind of parting bit of advice I give is that the younger you are, the greater your appetite for risk should be. I certainly took a leap by starting a business out of university, knowing that if it had failed, I would have relatively little liability, like kids and mortgages and wives and so on and so forth. So I did it at the right time, but that was for me. It's deeply personal to people, and so connect with people, do your research, and listen to your instincts as to what you think might be the right thing to do. It's been great talking to you today, Jackson. Thanks for having me in.
Duncan, thank you so much for sharing expertise and insights with us. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Duncan. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed learning more about launching a career at Google. We look forward to seeing you again for our next Aqaba series. Thank you and goodbye.